The New Orleans Saints wanted change going into 2024, and they've decided that everyone needs a change, including head coach Dennis Allen. We got all of that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a senior writer and reporter over at Saints News Network on SI. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, we're going to take a look focusing a bit on the offensive side of the football, answering some of, or really asking some of, the biggest questions for the New Orleans Saints going into training camp, which kicks off in earnest on Wednesday. So we're going to be taking a look at a few different things. Critical pieces to the New Orleans Saints improvement in 2024. Who matters most to the success on the offensive side? We're going to take a look at projecting the starting offensive line. What will it look like going into training camp? But more importantly, what might it look like going into the regular season? And of course, we're going to kick everything off here with conversation around quarterback and head coach. Yeah, the biggest story for every NFL team. Change is paramount for the New Orleans Saints 2024 success, and everyone looks to be chipping in, but will it be enough to win games? We got that and much more coming up for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much for being an everydayer and for making us your first listen of the day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is going to help you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster and for free. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Well, the New Orleans Saints knew that they needed change going into 2024, particularly on the offensive side of the football. And not only did they change over an entire offensive coaching staff, not only are you watching Derek Carr now try to change as a quarterback in a way, we'll discuss that, but we're also watching some change happening for Dennis Allen as well. Matthew Paris over at NOLA.com doing a phenomenal piece highlighting the fact that DA's cool now, according to some players. I don't know. I got to see it. But it's an interesting thing. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Dennis Allen's cool now, so everything's fine. That's just not the reality, right? The reality is that you could be as cool as you want, but can you lead your team to winning games? And that's what Dennis Allen desperately needs to prove in 2024. And I think he knows that. I think every coach knows that that's the measure by which you're ranked, you're gauged, your future is decided, all of that. But it is interesting because so long did we talk about this New Orleans Saints team not showing accountability for itself. Then all of a sudden, you go into the 2024 offseason or the offseason ahead of 2024, and all of a sudden, the entire offensive coaching staff has changed. That's accountability. All of a sudden, Dennis Allen is doing some things that are creating camaraderie and culture and all these other things after talking about a culture change. A lot of people wondered, well, you're talking about the culture change, but what are you trying to change the culture to? And then in some cases, they didn't even want to use the word culture. Now we're getting our first glimpse into what that new culture actually is. A little bit more do it instead of say it. I have some respect for that. But are you going to win games? That's what all this is going to come down to. None of it matters if the record is 6-11 by the end of the season, 7-10 by the end of the season. I'm not trying to speak those things into existence for you Saints fans. I'm not trying to do that. You know where I come from on this. But I appreciate the effort of it very, very much. But obviously, it's all going to be colored by what the end result actually is, right? But it is interesting to see, Dennis Allen was quoted basically turning the quote that he used not too long ago a bunch about doing the same thing is the definition of, and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. Well, he talked about continuity, right? And a lot of us were critical of the idea of continuity because continuity doesn't mean anything if all that continuity is bringing you is mediocrity. And he had a very similar outlook on that same thing, and that holding on to continuity and expecting different results is insanity, is exactly the way that he laid it out. So you're seeing a little bit of that sort of vocal out front, out in the open. Here's what we're trying to do. Here's where the accountability is. Here's what we're trying to change. Here's what we're trying to redefine. But now we just got to see if it ends up getting them to the points where they're winning games. And look, everything Dennis Allen touches on the defensive side, it works. The big issue was the offense. So that was the other big change for the New Orleans Saints, was that they needed an offense that was more creative, that was more innovative, that could snap into action earlier in games, not have to play from behind in games. So will Klint Kubiak's new offense, one of the big questions going into training camp, be able to do that? Will it elevate the talent of this offense? I point out often that a lot of the big question marks that we had all throughout the majority of the 2023 season were centered around the talent that the Saints had on offense, but the fact that the scheme and the system didn't support it. And we were told a lot that like, well, look, it takes time, all this other stuff. But then it took 12 games. And then it went from it taking time to, modernizing an offense, it's all the same, blah, blah, blah. But then now we're hearing from Dennis Allen that they've been doing the same thing for 17 years and it was time for something new. So even Dennis Allen himself, all of a sudden agreeing, and I think it's not really all of a sudden, right? He did hire the new offensive coordinator, right? So there's a lot of like trying not to throw your present guy under the bus, but understanding that you do or are heading towards a change. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where the New Orleans Saints organization was mentally throughout the 2023 season, or at least deep into the 2023 season. It would just be, it would be ridiculous if they weren't, right? Like that just doesn't, and then they ended up making the change anyway. It's proof positive, yada, yada. So it's just interesting now to hear all these things out loud. So you look at Derek Carr, you look at Klint Kubiak, you look at Dennis Allen. These are going to be the guys that are going to be most paramount to the Saints' ability to change on the offensive side when it comes to 2024. I know Dennis Allen doesn't call offensive plays. He's not going to have a lot to do with the offense, but he's the guy that brought in the guy that has everything to do with the offense. Therefore, he's attached to whether or not it's successful, right? So it is a big year for Dennis Allen. It's a big year for Klint Kubiak. It's a big year for Derek Carr, who is at that point in his career, as every quarterback gets to at some point post 30 years old, that they're having to prove themselves every year. That's where Derek Carr is. He has to prove himself in 2024. And now potentially he has the offensive system that's ready to get it done. But here's where Derek Carr has to make his change. Derek Carr has to make his change in not struggling with a new offensive coordinator in their first year together. We've seen Derek Carr go through 7 different offensive coordinator changes since he entered the league in 2014. And so now you've got, and one of those was him starting with Greg Olsen and then going to somebody else, and then later on changing from John Gruden back to Greg Olsen. So, there's a little bit of an easier transition, quote unquote, in there, but it's never simple to have to undergo and learn a new system, learn a new language from a new offensive coordinator, all this other stuff. It's never simple, but it's going to have to be simplified and successful here in 2024. So you already see Dennis Allen, the Saints, all these folks like, Matthew Paris's phenomenal piece over at NOLA.com laying out like, hey, here's kind of an announcement to the world. Welcome the new DA. I think it was Tyrann Mathieu said, DA's cool now. Okay, we'll see. I love it, but we'll see what that actually means for their success. The change of Klint Kubiak, right? The change of the offense as shepherded by Klint Kubiak. And then your ability to be able to pioneer a change in the execution of the offense through quarterback Derek Carr. Those are going to be the things that are going to be paramount to the New Orleans Saints' success in 2024. And we start to get our first glimpses at all of those things. How does Dennis Allen conduct himself differently during practice? How does Klint Kubiak continue to get this offense under everybody's feet, or get the offense's feet under them with the new system? And how does Derek Carr, lead all of this as the quarterback on the team? It's going to be interesting to watch and fun to watch. And we get our first glimpses of it this week. Coming up next, we also get our next glimpses of the New Orleans Saints offensive line. What will they look like when they start training camp versus what might they look like at the beginning of the season? Could be 2 different answers. We got that coming up for you as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sports. Never stop. Never stop. MLB rolling along, WNBA more popular than ever, the Olympics on the way. You can get in on all of that and much more over at FanDuel.com, where the sports literally never stop. Right now, they're hooking up all customers with a free boost or bonus daily. Daily. That's right. That means that there is something new for everyone, every day, all summer long, over at FanDuel.com. So you can get on an MLB and WNBA action right now. You can get on some Olympics props as well as that moves forward. That's always a lot of fun for me. I love those. You can get ahead on the New Orleans Saints, who are still favorites to open the season against the Carolina Panthers in September. You can start to get into preseason stuff. There's a ton. You can even get into end-of-year awards already. You can find it all over at FanDuel.com. That's where you're going to go to start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, family, along with the big question marks around the leaders of the New Orleans Saints team, come the protectors of the New Orleans Saints team, the guys in the trenches. This has been a very, very common offseason topic. Let's revisit once more before we go into training camp and ask more specific questions. What will the offensive line look like going into camp? What will it look like going into the season? We'll talk about a couple different personalities here as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. We appreciate you very much. Make us your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget to go and check out Locked On Sports Today. The 24/7 streaming channel is programmed specifically to bring you the biggest stories from around the world of sports from the local experts that actually cover the teams every single day, just like we do every single day here on Locked On Saints. Make sure you go and check it out on the Locked On Sports Today YouTube page, as well as on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The New Orleans Saints. Boy, listen, one of the biggest things that they're going to have to undergo is a change on the offensive line this offseason. They've got 3 new offensive line starters in a way, right? Trevor Penning started for the team last year at left tackle, but could potentially be starting for the team this year at right tackle. So it would make only really 2.5 things for sure, okay? 2.5 things that are for sure. Number 1, Erik McCoy will start at center. Number 2, Cesar Ruiz will start at right guard. Number 3, Taliese Fuaga will start, right? The first round pick out of Oregon State in this year's 2024 NFL draft, but we're not exactly sure just yet. So let's take a look at what the New Orleans Saints offensive line could look like going into training camp, right? Which begins later on this week. We'll be there, so you'll get this information. Remember, if you want the information sooner than everybody else, join subtext.com/LockedOnSaints or text Saints to 504-285-7473. Okay, insider program. Get everything quick. Otherwise, you'll get it here on the show. So, or at least most of it here on the show, not all of it. But here's what I want to look at. You just know. Taliese Fuaga is going to start somewhere on this offensive line. We just don't know if it's at left tackle or right tackle just yet. Okay. So beginning training camp, he could potentially be moved back over to right tackle. That's what he played the first 2 seasons, or the only 2 seasons that he played over at Oregon State. That's a position that he's naturally comfortable with, but he has also looked very comfortable all throughout OTAs, all throughout mini camps, playing over the left tackle spot as well. Remember, get the most important position on your offensive line right, your left tackle spot, right? In this case, because Derek Carr is a right-handed quarterback, therefore the left tackle is the blind side guy, right? Protecting where Derek Carr can't see. So get that right. So if that means Fuaga, if that means Penning, whatever, just get that spot right. Now, we've seen Penning be the wrong answer there 2 times already. So is that enough now for the New Orleans Saints to say, okay, now the switch to right tackle is permanent? I think it could be. So therefore, my expectation going into training camp is that Fuaga will be at left tackle, Penning will be at right tackle. With Penning at right tackle, the idea is that you're bringing him back to square one. You're reteaching him fundamentals over on a different side of his body. You're reteaching him basically all the principles of pass protection, run protection, all of that. So it's kind of taking him all the way back to square one. New offensive system, new offensive line coach. That's a very, very different type of developer than Doug Marrone was, in probably the best way possible for Trevor Penning, and brings him to a new position. So everything is new. And the thing that's really nice for him is that everyone around him is learning something new as well. At the very least, they're learning a new offensive system with a new offensive line coach. Therefore, they're relearning the communication, all these other things, the coaching style, all that. So everybody starts off back at some type of square one, which helps to kind of equalize everything for Trevor Penning as well, so that he's not the only one learning something new, which has kind of been the environment that he's been in the recent past. Not the most conducive learning environment. So could that be changed this year? It could be. Position changes don't often favor people that are struggling to transition to the NFL. Doesn't typically happen. Juwan Johnson, though, an example to the positive. Although I wouldn't say that he was necessarily struggling at wide receiver. It's just that he didn't necessarily have the opportunity to break through at wide receiver, transitioned over to tight end. Now he's the team's top tight end, right? So there are examples of players who undergo position changes that it ends up benefiting. The challenge is when they struggle first and then you change their position, then things are a little bit less likely percentage-wise. But maybe, just maybe, this is exactly what Trevor Penning needs. And again, if the Saints get left tackle right, they have a lot of wiggle room because they have an excellent center. They have a really good guard in Cesar Ruiz. And then they can find a really good guard at left guard, which is open right now. Now they could do that with Nick Saldiveri, who I assume will be the starting offensive lineman on the interior next to or opposite Cesar Ruiz as training camp begins. But Shane Lemieux, the veteran, is there. Lucas Patrick, another veteran, is there with a lot of starting experience at that position. And other players that could potentially go there too, like Ali Udoh, who has played right guard before in his career, particularly with the Minnesota Vikings under Klint Kubiak. So there is that connective tissue there for sure. So lots of things that could potentially go down. So here's what I expect the offensive line to look like when training camp begins. No surprises. Taliese Fuaga at left tackle, Nick Saldiveri at left guard, Erik McCoy at center, Cesar Ruiz at right guard, and then Trevor Penning at right tackle. No big surprise there. That is worth the expectation, or that is the expectation, worth the expectation. It's worth my energy to expect that, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But what it looks like to start the season can vary. What if Trevor Penning doesn't pan out? Could they turn to Landon Young? Sure. Could they turn to Ali Udoh? For sure. Could they turn to Justin Herron, a guy that nobody ever talks about, who was a starting offensive lineman for the New England Patriots for 2 years before being traded to the Raiders, only for the Raiders to not really have the opportunity to ever play him. Now, there was some health stuff, like all this stuff, it's fine. But when it comes down to it, like this is a guy that played over 390 offensive snaps in 2021, his second year with the Patriots, and allowed 1 sack. Pretty good stuff from Justin Herron. So 5 sacks a year before that, his rookie year though. So take that for what you will, but he played more snaps the following year and allowed way less sacks during that time. So a guy like Justin Herron could potentially compete there. A guy like Lucas Patrick could compete. Why was that so hard to say? Could compete at left guard. So the offensive line beginning the season could look mad different than what it looks like to open up training camp. And I think that that's fine. I think the thing that matters the most for the New Orleans Saints is that they get their 5 best athletes out there in positions that they can play. That's it. Get your 5 best athletes out there. You need an athletic offensive line construction for this offense. It wants you to move off the ball. It wants you to get to the second level. It wants you to attack. It wants you to push in the run game. It wants you to move. It needs you to do all of these things. So you have to be athletic. So get the athletes out there. And then handle the pass protection at the spots that are most important. Solidify your center role. Done. Erik McCoy is one of the best in the league. Get your left tackle spot taken care of on the way to being done, right? If Fuaga pans out, then it's perfect, right? Then your passing game can get going. Then just focus on getting the ball out of the hands of the quarterback quickly, operating your scheme, operating your system, which will also be brand new. So lots of different options for what the team could look like when the season begins, but we think we know what it's going to look like to open up training camp. So that answers one of the 2 big questions for the New Orleans Saints offensive line. The third will be, can it perform in 2024? And it's going to have to take until game time to answer that one. Coming up next, I want to tell you the pieces to this New Orleans Saints offense that are most critical to improvement, and why not only Derek Carr, and why Derek Carr does not have to do this alone on the offensive side of the football. We got that coming up for you as we continue on to wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. If you're looking to hire, LinkedIn Jobs absolutely has to be your one and only destination, because it tends to be the one and only destination of the people that are actually looking for jobs as well. 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other job posting sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're simply looking in the wrong place. Don't do that to yourself. Don't do that to yourself. You know how important it is, especially as a small business, to make sure you're finding the right employees that fit your culture, that fit the role that you're looking for, that have the experience, everything. So make sure that you're checking it all out over at LinkedIn. 86% of small businesses get qualified candidates within 24 hours of posting their job. Hire professionals like a professional over on LinkedIn. And they're constantly finding ways to help make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that will help you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and quicker. 2.5 million small businesses use LinkedIn for hiring. You can too. Post your job for free today at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. While Derek Carr is probably going to be the player on the offensive side under the biggest microscope or most magnified microscope, I don't know, but that's going to be under the closest look throughout the New Orleans Saints offense is success, improvements, all that in 2024. He doesn't have to do it alone. There are other pieces that are going to be critical to the New Orleans Saints success in 2024 on that side of the football, and I want to highlight a few of them. We appreciate you very much as always for being here. Don't forget, we are your team every day here on Locked On Saints. We're back tomorrow doing the same thing, looking at some of the bigger questions around the defensive side, including a look at what the New Orleans Saints need most in order to continue their success for defense and why his name is Demario Davis. So we're going to take a look at all that in tomorrow's episode. Ahead of when I'm like, that episode is actually going to go up while I'm, or will be up while I'm flying to California, like this, with my arms out, spread out, flying. I am going to be heading to California on Tuesday. And then we are expected to we typically get coaches, stuff like that before training camp begins. And then training camp begins on Wednesday. So we out here, or will be out there. So that's going to be a lot of fun. I can't wait. I'm very excited. And I know that fans can't be there. So I'm going to do everything that I can to make the information as accessible as possible for every fan that wants to be there and can't be there. So 2 episodes a day. Including 1 live episode from UC Irvine where, I'll give you all the lowdown. Here's what happened in practice today, all that. We'll have some written stuff over at Saints News Network. You can join the Insider program to get stuff immediately after practice. You can do that by texting Saints to 504-285-7473. But I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure you're getting the information. Speaking of getting you the information, let me shut up now and I'll talk about what I wanted to talk about to wrap up the show. My apologies. But I really want you to know that, doing the thing. I'm going to be out there every single day for training camp. So I want to make sure you're getting the info. All right. Outside of Derek Carr, who is the most important player when it comes to success or improvement for the New Orleans Saints offense? I'm going to start with a name that should be of no surprise to you. We just talked about the offensive line. And so, I can easily highlight Taliese Fuaga if he's going to be the starter at left tackle. Boom, right? Hugely important for the team's offense. Erik McCoy, boom, hugely important for the team's offense. Going outside of Derek Carr in the offensive line, though, it should be no surprise when I utter the words Chris Olave, or rather the name Chris Olave. I think that Chris is going to be particularly important for this New Orleans Saints offense. It is an offense that's going to be predicated on its run game. So again, that's one of the things that makes the offensive line so incredibly important. It makes Alvin Kamara incredibly important as well. I'm going to come back to him here in just a moment. That's going to be my next guy. Spoiler alert. But it's what we say all the time on the show. You pass to score points, and then you run to win the game. And look, you got to be able to run before that too. I know I'm making a moniker out of it. I get it, but you've got to be able to put points on the board through the air. You have to be able to do that. And Chris Olave is going to be the number 1 guy. Now, I think a lot of people misconstrue the idea of being the number 1. They think of being an X receiver, right? The big possession guy that you go to first, second, third down, whatever, in every situation, all that. Chris Olave is going to do his best to play that type of role in terms of being the guy that the quarterback can always rely on. I think he's kind of already proven that he can be that guy. But is he going to be the guy that can take over a football game? That I don't know. And really, the Saints haven't had that wide receiver since 2019, if we're being honest. Michael Thomas has not been able to be that receiver, and the Saints have not been able to find that receiver that can just take over a football game. So Chris Olave maybe can be that guy. maybe he doesn't have to be that guy. And this is where the system becomes so important. If the system elevates this offense and elevates the passing game, Chris Olave becomes incredibly important to that elevation, but he doesn't have to take over a game ever. The system, the offense can take over a game by spreading the football around, a la Drew Brees Thanksgiving Day, throwing touchdowns to 4 different undrafted receivers or pass catchers. That kind of a thing. But in any case, I think Chris Olave has to be the guy that at least threatens the defense enough that they're paying attention to him, as opposed to kind of, being able to be evenly comfortable around what the New Orleans Saints are doing. So I think he has to be a big part of what drives the improvement in 2024 as well. Being a better, not a better scorer, but being a bigger scoring threat would be huge. And of course, if he's able to add a little bit of yards after catch to his game, then things really get kind of, huge for what he can do in 2024. But I think he is pivotal to the New Orleans Saints' ability to improve on the offensive side of the football. Let's go to Alvin Kamara next, because I do believe that Alvin Kamara and the New Orleans Saints will get some kind of winning on both sides type of agreement done. There's just not a lot of examples otherwise in the NFL. And it's not like the New Orleans Saints have another surefire option to turn to at the position, right? We all think Kendre Miller can be good, but we don't know. And so the New Orleans Saints need Alvin Kamara, and he is a perfect fit for what this New Orleans Saints offense wants to do. He has never been a guy that when you run him between the tackles, that he creates his own yardage. He has always been a dude in those situations that relies on the yardage that's being created for him by the offensive line, getting into open space, and then creating an open space. Alvin Kamara did not get a lot of open space in 2023. And so getting him an open space here in 2024 is going to be a big part of the game plan. He is a huge part of what the New Orleans Saints want to do in 2024, which is why I simply don't believe right now that the Saints won't find a way to get this done, and that Alvin Kamara's camp won't find a way to get this done. If that happens and they don't get it done, then that big misstep on both sides in that situation. But we'll see where things go. But assuming that Alvin Kamara is on the roster in 2024, this offense wants to be predicated on its run game. Its run game that was 21st in the NFL last year. Every offense has its weak points, but can you eliminate the weak points? Yes. And the Saints could potentially eliminate one of their weak points, which was their rushing offense, with a system that is specifically built to elevate a rushing offense, which then benefits what a passing offense is doing in addition. So that's why Alvin Kamara is pivotal to the New Orleans Saints improvement. Or let's say whoever the running back is that's getting the most carries in any individual game, right? Whoever that is, incredibly important to the New Orleans Saints' success. Now we'll go back to the offensive line, because to me, the offensive line is the other one that I think is going to be pivotal. Blindside protector, huge. Having a center that can understand what's going on, orchestrate the offense, communicate with the offensive line, all that, as well as Erik McCoy can, pivotal. Erik McCoy, Derek Carr, no more shouting matches, pivotal. Like those things all have to be in line as well. And then finally, and I know a couple people who are going to hate me for saying this, but I don't care. Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is going to be pivotal to the New Orleans Saints' success. Anybody that's been upset with the contract that Taysom Hill has gotten has not been paying attention to what Taysom Hill has done for this team that no one else has been able to do for this team, which is consistently put points on the board. He has been the only player that we've really watched take over a game in the last 2 years against the Seattle Seahawks a couple years ago. So, for me, Taysom Hill's another one that ends up driving a lot of opportunity for improvement and success in his expanding role in this new offense, and I cannot wait to see him in it. All right, those are my ones. There are more. Tell me who you think is critical to the New Orleans Saints' success on offense, and you can get ahead of me tomorrow if you want to. Tell me who you think is critical to success over on defense and why their name is Demario Davis, which is what we're going to be breaking down in tomorrow's episode. Appreciate you so much as always. Make it Locked On Saints your first listen of the day. Locked On Pelicans, Locked On LSU. Make sure you go and check them out as well. We appreciate you very much making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how you're momming them. And just Who Dat Nation, I'll holla at you. Oh.